Labor Day has come and gone again, and with it, so has the Nova Open. I flew out to DC to attend my second Nova this year, and while I'm still recovering from a genuinely exhausting good time, I'm already inspired for my next projects. I showed up on Wednesday this year, giving me a day to settle in, hang out with my Badcast co-host Dan Boyd, and catch the GW preview event. Much like AdeptCon, this event was to showcase some upcoming releases, but filming was not allowed, so you'll get some B-roll instead. Pretty much everything they talked about was posted to the community site shortly thereafter, but there's a tangible excitement in being one of the first few people to see trailers and pictures of new models and games. Unfortunately, the last half hour of the panel was a Q&A, which, frankly, is always the worst part of a panel. Right afterwards, though, I got to try the new Necromunda Underhive game. As a big fan of the original, I had a load of fun playing my beloved Goliaths and renderizing some pesky Eschers. The models and boards were beautiful. The game had an exciting alternating activations mechanic, and the rules were more straightforward and streamlined than the original. This one, I'm excited for. Also on Wednesday, I picked up my Supernova swag bag. This thing was incredible, containing a KR multi-case backpack, Horus Heresy miniatures, a ton of coupons and gift certificates, the Guild Ball starter set, a handful of books, various things to drink out of, a bag of snacks, and even a stick of deodorant, which I thought was a nice touch. The beer mug included gave a discount to draft beers in the lounge as well, something I would be taking advantage of over the next few days. Thursday the dealer hall opened, and it was bigger than ever this year. There was everything from the big guys to little upstart companies showing up to show off their wares, as well as regulars like Atlantis Comics and the Toledo Game Room. In a first, Games Workshop was here too, selling Forge World goodies and some of the new 40k boxes. I picked up a few kits to round out my Black Templars, as well as a firmer Terra gaming table. Expect more on that later once I get a chance to play on it. The day was open until late that night, so I got to walk around the convention hall and check out all the various games going on. The 40k trios and Grand Tournament were going on, and there was at least one Gilman or Magnus on almost every table. I admired some of the prettier armies there, and there were some gorgeous ones, but that kind of competitive gaming just isn't my speed. The main event for me, however, was the 40k narrative. This was run by Joe Caperna and Colin Keelick, the same guys who ran the narrative last year, as well as the Page Apocalypse event I made a video for back in January. The narrative is an event that spans all 4 days of Nova, with the players dividing into two teams, Humanity and Virtue. The narrative plays into an ongoing story that pits these two teams against each other as they vie for control of a system. The team captains announce their picks for pairings over different planets and zones, where victory will grant that team special abilities and bonuses in ongoing games. These picks are typically planned out in strategy meetings, which are equal parts tactical planning meetings and hang out with your buddies and trash talking at the bar. The ongoing nature of the event builds up a rivalry and a rapport between the teams that both sets the mood for the event and makes long-lasting friends out of the people you meet. For this reason, this is my favorite event in all of the hobby. As with last year, I was on Humanity, with Dan taking the role of team captain. Over the course of 4 days, I played in all 7 standard 40k games, plus the massive campaign deciding Apocalypse game at the end. I skipped the recon missions between games, as my games often ran long, and I'd rather take that time between to eat, shop, drink, or just take a breather. I brought my Black Templars to the field this year, as they're the army I've practiced most with in 8th edition. I always like bringing new armies to events like this, but I found out in the coming days I had a lot to learn about 40k. My first game was against a Tau player with a beautifully painted army he got commissioned. Unfortunately, it wasn't much of a game, as he got first turn and pretty much wiped me off the board. Afterwards, when I asked him what I could have done differently, he didn't have an answer for me. He did have a mantra that he was more than happy to show off though, which came in its own case like Marcellus Wallace's briefcase. My second game was a totally different experience. I played against Gavin and his Tyranid list, which had a fun mix of old and new minis and a colorful paint scheme. This game was an absolute blast, and we were both on the same page the whole time. He was dropping spore mines, which caused me to think about movement and positioning more than I ever had in a game of 40k before, and I hope I get to play against him next year. For what it's worth, this was a victory for me, but that's secondary to how much fun we both had. Game 3 was a doubles game, where Dan and I joined forces against a different Dan and Spencer. Our opponents brought an absolute buttload of Tyranids, and their turns took actual hours to complete because of how many models they had and how often they were confirming and double checking things with each other. This game took 5 hours, but in the last 45 minutes or so, it really heated up, and Dan and I secured a solid victory. Unfortunately, after that game I partied a bit too hard, so I don't remember a whole load of the game against Carl and his Iron Warriors afterwards. He actually made Obliterators look good though, which is impressive. I played a sloppy game and got beaten as a result, but the Emperor's champion killed a demon prince, and that's pretty cool. He was a good dude and I hope I can play him again when I'm a little more with it. The next morning, some 6 hours later, I had set up to play against Matt and his artillery company. We were both feeling tired at this point, and it was a rough matchup for my mostly anti-infantry army. We both only started playing for the objective on turn 4, and he got a narrow victory from it. That afternoon, after a little rest and a lot of caffeine, I played against Katie's Yanari list. This army looked great and was drawing a lot of buzz both over how good it looked and how deadly and cutthroat it was. Well, with some good die rolls, good positioning and timing, I was able to pull off a devastating victory over her Eldar. She and my Rhino surrounded in an attempt to kill my tactical squad, but unfortunately was parked right near where my Land Raider Crusader squad, Chaplain, Storm Raven, and the Emperor's champion were. I pulled off a massive multi-assault, blew away Yvraine with my Storm Raven, and blew 3 command points on a Doctrine to attack twice, and she conceded. I played a tactically sound game, which is a rarity for me. My third game of the night saw me teamed up with my pal Dave from last year and his airbrushed wizard van Land Raiders and Knight. We were up against Matt and his artillery from earlier, as well as John and his Dark Angels. I knew it was going to be a slog from the beginning though, as both teams were thinking, this is gonna suck. While the game went on for way too long, we did pull out a victory, and we still managed to have some fun with it. Finally, on the last day, we had our massive apocalypse game. It was something like 8 players a side with 3,000 to 4,000 points per player, making up a mega battle the size and scope of which I hadn't seen since the Philadelphia area gaming enthusiast apocalypse event that I covered in a previous video and was run by the same folks. This was the battle to decide this year's narrative, and my boys on Humanity had the decided upper hand, earning us the ability to go first. The battle saw a veritable buttload of knights, all kinds of Forge World units, companies of Imperial Guard, super heavy tanks, and on top of it all, a Warlord Titan and that massive Manta from earlier. Those last two were on Virtue's side though, and it was going to be difficult to take them down. While we had turn 1, our damage wasn't as high as we hoped. We put some hurt down the Warlord and cut through some of the vehicles, knights, and infantry on the front lines, but our real accomplishment was in advancing all our troops to the center line of objectives. Holding those objectives would grant us points every turn, and only troops units could score them. The fire that came back was devastating, with flyers getting shot down, wounds getting stripped off our super heavies, and entire mobs of infantry dying in the field. Virtue, however, didn't have many boots in the ground themselves, and the few they did have didn't head towards the objectives fast enough. If they wanted to stand a chance, they'd have to come to us. Turn 2 saw us holding the line across the board while trying, with reduced firepower, to take down the Warlord. We generally ignored the Manta as we weren't going to kill that anytime too soon, and trying to split fire between that and the Warlord just wasn't going to cut it. I committed my forces to killing Angrath the Unbound, and the thought of killing that big jerk with the Emperor's champion was too good to pass up. Unfortunately, Angrath is tough as nails, and that wasn't going to happen this turn. Fortunately, as my army was mostly infantry and a pretty standard army list fare, my guys got passed over during a lot of the return fire. While my Storm Raven went down, my infantry and characters were largely ignored. My Terminators unfortunately didn't fare so well. While they pumped out some fire, their Power Fists and Thunderhammers just weren't hitting or wounding enough, and they got stranded and gunned down pretty quickly. On turn 3, both sides saw reinforcements arrive, with the Yanari army I fought earlier showing up on the far right flank and an entire Imperial Guard and Custodes army reinforcing my corner. This wave of troops and vehicles was appreciated, and they put the hurt on the Warlord. The Warlord, even with its reduced efficacy, shot back and wiped out most of the Imperial Guard armor, but even with the Yanari reinforcements and all their intact firepower, Virtue had little success actually taking the objectives. My Templars held their objective, pushed into enemy territory, and my Marshal, Sigvard, killed Angrath with his Comba Melta. With the points ratcheting up each turn, humanity was looking more and more confident in victory. The fourth turn saw something magical happen. Kaldor Drago, through one means or another, found himself up next to the Warlord Titan. It had been brought down from its once mighty 70 wounds down to just 5. Drago got a charge off on the Titan, and, somehow, managed to kill it. The entire table erupted in cheers and applause as the Titan was killed, although its explosion didn't match his majesty. While Virtue still had the Manta, the loss of the Warlord was huge, and only now were they catching up and taking objectives from us. The fifth and final turn saw humanity take it away, holding the line admirably and fending off the remainder of Virtue. We called it at the end of turn 5, ending early somehow, and humanity had won the day, and with it, the narrative. Much like the previous Page Apocalypse game, this was tightly run, with strict time limits on everything. It started at 45 minutes per side to get their turns off, with the round shortening as the game went on. People were encouraged to move on to their next phase so long as the players around them were ready to, instead of waiting for the players on the other side of the 20-something foot table to finish their phases. No turns were cut off too early as far as I could tell, and most importantly, everybody seemed to have fun. Keeping the turns on a tight timetable was easier with the more streamlined 8th edition rules and necessity for games this size. Nobody to my knowledge got completely tabled, save for the Warlord Titans owner, so everybody got to stay in the game until the end. I have to give thanks to Joe and Colin for making this event happen, and to all my opponents and teammates for showing up. If I had to give any criticism of the narrative though, I think it would be to limit players to one army list per points level. There were a few games where I'd bring an army and my opponent would start adjusting their army list to match mine, and that put a bad taste in my mouth. Pre-approving army lists, some kind of comp enforcement, or tiered matchups would be good too, as not everybody brought the same level of list. That Tau army absolutely swept the event, and I don't think anybody really had fun playing against it, while some players with softer lists just got rolled. I also think that letting random people jump into games a la carte wasn't great, as it detracted a bit from the ongoing nature of the event. Seeing the same people each day and building that rapport, I think, is the real appeal of the narrative, and having people drop in and out doesn't really add to it. It makes matchups more confusing as the captains don't know their armies or lists. I would also like to see more planning meetings. I crashed all of them last year and they were a blast, but there's only one this year, and while it was good, it just wasn't the same. I still had a great time though, and it's the premier 40k gaming event of the year as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, after that last massive game, there was an award ceremony, and then it was time for the after party. We all headed up to the lounge and had more than our fair share of drinks, all for charity mind you, and then, when that closed down around 1 AM, headed back to our room with a few of our buddies and had a good old-fashioned room party till 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll tell you how I was feeling it the next morning, and even after I landed back home in Boston, but it was an absolutely fantastic time. I learned a lot about 40k this year at Nova. I've learned a lot about how armies should work and how they work together, and what goes into building a functional one. I've learned a lot about how other armies work and what I should prepare to deal with, as well as just figuring out how those armies work on the tabletop. It's still a new edition with an ever-shifting meta, and while I'll never be the kind of guy who plays in a GT, it's fun to see what's under the hood of an army. Next year, I'm hoping to play better, even if that doesn't mean bringing a beatstick list or taking something from the internet. I'm also going to offer some advice to myself and anyone hoping to go next year. Wear comfortable shoes. My knees were killing me by day 2, and being in pain is no fun. I brought a pair of gym shoes because I was under the false pretense I'd actually use the gym there, but I was wearing those from day 2 onwards. Get some sleep. I was up until 2 AM or later playing or partying every night and waking up at 8. If I could have sped those night games up a little and gotten an extra hour of sleep in, I would have had way more fun in the AM. Pace yourself. While I never made a mess of myself, I definitely had a bit too much to drink on the second night, and that compounded over each following day. As of this writing, I'm still recovering from the combination of alcohol, caffeine, and a lack of sleep. Don't overcommit. I'm glad I avoided the recon squads between narrative games, so I could get some time to chill out. It definitely made the actual games more enjoyable, if anything else. If I tried to fit some seminars or pickup games in there, I probably would have passed out during my last game of the night. Socialize. There's loads of opportunities to hang out, talk with people in the industry, and make lifelong friends at cons like this. I had a crew of folks I met at Adepticon in the previous Nova that I was thrilled to hang out with, as well as a bunch of other folks, some of whom I discovered live right in my backyard. This is a social hobby, and while there's so much you can do on your own, people are what make it. And finally, have fun. I definitely got kind of salty in 1 or 2 of my games, and I should have done more to make a good time out of it, whether that was by making objectives for myself or focusing more on the social aspect of what I was doing. Not every game will be a great one, but we're in this hobby to have a good time after all. And so ends another Nova. Thanks to everyone who ran games or joined me for rounds of either Warhammer or drinks, and to everyone new who I met there. Welcome! I hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to support Camhammer, subscribe or support me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'm gonna go take a nap.